now call on Dr. Chichi and Aniagolu to discussant to make her intervention. And Chichi, you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ngozi, and I must commend you and your team for organizing this event. I'll just start. I'm not going to repeat what everybody has said because, I mean, we're all here and we heard. But I think that certain things jumped at me that I really would like to talk about and amplify as well. I think Father George, he talked a lot about the power relations, about rape being about power. And I think it is something that we really need to understand, that the base of rape is control, you know, and I do agree with him as well when he talks about the people who do this as people who are sick. But I think that if we listen to what Nuruddin talked about, you know, he reminded us that a lot of rape cases are actually within the family. And so we cannot be externalizing rape. We cannot always be thinking about rape as something that is happening on the outside. This is something that is happening within families. And so, and that's part of the reason why it is so silent. Because not only is it a shame for the girl, it's also a shame for the family that something like this is being perpetuated. Father George talked about male chauvinism. And I think for me, you know, this again, of course, ties back to the power relations that we talk about. And I think that this is something that the church is should be very clear, you know, in talking about and really talking about, you know, how male chauvinism and male power is perpetuating not just rape, but a lot of the system collapse, you know, for want of a better word, we are facing in Nigeria today. I think it's very important to note that both religions, you know, do not condone rape in any sense of the word, you know, and so, you know, if you look at the Old Testament, there are very, very, you know, stringent punishments against rape, in the same way that Nuruddin had talked about it being in Islam. But I think that maybe what the challenge for the church is that, just like Father George said, that sex is not being discussed in a healthy way. You know, for many churches, you know, sin has, of course, vanished, especially when we look at our different denominations, if we look at our Pentecostal churches and things, which is good because it's important for people to, you know, have a very positive outlook to life. But part of what religion does is to remind us, you know, of our own obligations to God, not just God's obligations to us. And so we're moving away from discussing our obligations to God, which includes, you know, self-control. So when, you know, sex is discussed in the context of sin, the focus often in churches, and I will talk a lot more about church because I'm a Christian, and that's the religion that I understand more. When sex is discussed, it's not discussed in a healthy way, like Father George said. You know, raging teenagers need to have a healthy relationship with the topic of sex. Yes, of course, as religious institutions, we must continue to emphasize that sex is only allowed within a marriage. But what happens to the teenager, you know, who begins to have all sorts of, you know, sexual feelings, and they have nowhere to go to, and then they go to church, and the only thing they hear in church is about how terrible sex is, and why it is bad, and why it needs to be, you know, but nobody says, yes, but we know that you're going through these feelings. So I think it's important. And then when it is discussed at all, it is often the girl who is admonished. I know that Father George had talked about this, but he's in the minority when you talk about, you know, the preaching that goes on in churches. Often it is, if we're discussing sex, It's about how the girl is dressed, where they went, who they associated with. The boy who actually perpetuates the crime is treated as the victim. You know, he was the one who was seduced. You know, she should not have gone to his house. She's the one, the boy is the one, you know, who is a victim. And that's what is reinforced, you know, in a lot of the preaching that we hear. And I'm glad that some of that is changing as, you know, as people are becoming a lot more aware of what the consequences are. And also as well, as long as more, you know, as it's coming out more, that younger and younger children, you know, are being involved. So the thing about justifying a crime is that you have no idea how far the criminal is willing to go. You know, we can say that we saw that with Boko Haram, where even the president said that an attack on Boko Haram was an attack on the North. Like Boko Haram, the rapist has run amok, raping 2-year-olds, 70-year-olds, daughters, cousins. You know, so now who can blame a 2-year-old for what she was wearing? What did the daughter who was raped by the father do? How do we have, now we have to deal with rape, and the church has to be on the forefront. And I'm talking about the church and the mosque as well, you know, because this is where people get their moral being. This is where people, you know, go to understand how they need to do and how they need to relate in a society. So for me, the church has to talk about sex in a healthy way. We cannot promote premarital sex like that. Somebody must talk about sex in a healthy way. And it's a good thing that Father George has talked about this. And I really will recommend that this seminar, you know, be held with mostly religious people, you know, priests and imams and pastors, and they need to be hearing this. The focus must shift from women to men. This idea that men are animals, you know, with untamable sexual appetite, it's unrealistic. And as a result, women need to be the ones cautioned to protect themselves against men, you know. But we have to remember that if you're a Christian, that Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, is a man. And he chose men as his disciples. He didn't have one single woman. So most of his teachings were to men. So if the things he preached were impossible for men, he would not have taught them. He taught that adultery was not just the act of sex, like Father said, but one that will have that starts with an impure thought. So it is what is in a man's heart that leads him to sin, not what a woman is wearing. The church needs to change the focus, you know, and of course, looking at the example of the woman that was caught in adultery and how Jesus Christ dealt with that. He turned the table on the men who were likely responsible even for her act. Maybe the person who she had the adultery with was right there, ready to stone her as well. But Jesus focused on the thoughts of the men, because it is from the abundance of your heart, you know, that that anything comes true. So, but we also have to understand, again, if we're looking at this untamable, you know, sexual appetite of men that we promote a lot in the church, and saying, oh, you know, men are like this, so women, you need to protect yourself, you need to do this. Let us look at African history. Let us look at African past. A lot of people are ashamed of the African past, and you see write-ups of people saying, oh no, Africans didn't walk around naked. People are ashamed of the fact that Africans at one point, you know, in time walked around naked. But for me, it is a history I am most proud of, because it shows that the image of the African male as a sexual predator is a colonial and racist construct, amplified, unfortunately, by the missionaries who first came to Africa. African men saw African women every day, naked, and never raped them. So we have a proud heritage of noble men. Our churches who have done a lot in trying to Africanize, you know, the religions that the missionaries did, need to also Africanize the image of the African male. The African male is not an animal. The African male is not, you know, this beast that needs that everybody needs to be locked up and he can then go on his rampaging. And if unfortunately he catches you on the way, then it's your fault because you had been told that there is an animal, on the rampage. That image, that construct of what an African male is, of what a Nigerian man is, needs to change because it is not true. Many of our traditional societies were very, very harsh on rape. It just didn't happen in many places because the consequence was just way too much. And maybe that's the problem. What is the consequence today, for people who rape? What is it that we're doing, for people who rape? So the church has to remind men that sexual sin has not been removed from the Bible, from the holy books. You talk about whether it is fornication or adultery or rape, it's still going to be judged by God. So the idea that boys will be boys and you know how men are will not cut it on the last day. So it is the responsibility of the church to constantly remind men. And if you are a man and you have authority, we have a patriarchal society in which men have dominance. So everybody looks to the leader. It is the leader who changes discourse. It is the leader who takes people to the next level. And so we need to rescue our men from the mentality that they have today. We need to rescue our men from this insanity of, sexual corruption, of moral corruption, of economic corruption, of political corruption. The leadership of our country, when it comes to the patriarchy, that we have, needs a lot of overhaul. And I do believe that the church and the mosque really needs a role to play in that. I really liked what Mal Muludim talked about, describing the way, I just absolutely loved his description of how, the Quran describes men and women as a garment, that, we know what a dress does for us. A dress not only doesn't just cover your nakedness, it gives you a sense of pride, it gives you a sense of image. If you're wearing a lovely dress, you know how that makes you. If this is the image that Islam has about men and women, I'm not sure that a lot of men and women, Muslim men and women, know this. So I think that there is a lot of education to be done, because what we hear, at least many times when I have read about rape cases, what we see judges passing down is that, the punishment for the rapist is to marry the raped. That's what you see coming out of some Sharia courts. How is that a punishment? You rape somebody, you're told to marry the person that you raped. So if this is not correct, I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done. I think that this idea of men and women being a garment, to each other is an absolutely beautiful imagery that has to be promoted. And there needs to be a lot of discussions about, male dominance and about construction of sexual relations between men and women going on also in Islam. Finally, I would like to say that I do know that rape may be a difficult conversation for the church, because it has also, had its fair share of rape cases. A lot of, just like Ngozi's introduction talked about, a lot of imams and pastors and whatnot, and priests as well have been indicted in this situation. So many in the church, and many of the good people in the church, may already be feeling condemned by the sins of the few and not feel justified to speak about rape and sexual violence, because of course the churches and the mosques are also implicated. But the church needs to remember, and often I believe they forget, they are just an instrument of the divine and not the divine. So if you're an instrument, the church is an institution, as an instrument of the divine. And so the church has to remind, I am just a vehicle. I am not the destination. And so Jesus promised us that if there was no one to worship him anymore, that the very stones themselves would be raised to worship him. So the church should not feel ashamed of the exposure of sexual and other crimes that are going on within its four walls. It is the Lord's purging of his vessel. If in the end, only 10 people remain, he will use them to repopulate his house.
Okay.
So, and I also think that, so if we remember that, then we need to, I only have 1 second left.
Okay.
We're already done.
Okay.
So we also need to begin to hear from male rapists. It's important that the church creates avenues. There are a lot of people who are rapists who come and confess and they want to, and they change. It's important to understand what the mentality of the rapist is, because we may postulate all we can here, but do we really know what goes on in the mind of an uncle, in the mind of a parent or a cousin or whatever that rapes their relative? It's important that the church, begins to help us understand that when they hear these things in confessionals or these people come to talk to them. Of course, you don't expose who the person is, but it's important for us to begin to understand the mentality of the rapist, because that's the only way we can actually address the issue. And finally, I would like to say that men, we need to understand, and the church needs to say this, that men do not have a right to women's bodies. They don't. No means no. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Chichi, for your interventions. We'll quickly go to Mr. Omagbitse Barrow to discuss the presentations we've heard so far.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I hope I am audible and that you can also see me. I would like to very importantly thank the organizers, like everyone has done. I think that we need to have more conversations around this subject matter more often, because it will certainly help with the work that the church or the mosques are doing and our faith is trying to do to get people aware at all levels. So thank you, and let's keep the conversations going. I'm just going to touch on a few things and just expand on some of the conversations that we've already heard. And then I would end very quickly with just talking about a few, putting them into blocks of things that we should pay attention to. The first thing I'd like to say is that when we think about the church and we talk about the religious, I want us to all remember that the church, for example, also includes not just the ministers, the pastors and the priests, but also all of us who are part of the congregation of this church. And that in reality, even the priests and the pastors and everybody else came from the congregation. Nobody was born a priest, a pastor, a bishop, or an imam. So we were all ordinary members, to use that word. And I'm saying this because we all have to take collective responsibility. I find too often that people think about the church and they say it is the priests and the pastors and the bishops. So when you ask, what is the church doing, like many of us are thinking right now, I want you to also recognize that the church includes you. If you're a Muslim, Islam includes you, not just the clerics. The second thing that I want to speak about quickly is around, so what is it that is also wrong sometimes? And I listen to Father George and I listen to Sheikh Lemu, very interesting around what is the common discourse. And Dr. Chichi also brought this up. What is the current, what is it that we talk about more in our places of worship? Are we actually, like Father George said, teaching morals and values? And what exactly are we celebrating? So even as people who are in a faith community, the question I'm asking and I want to challenge ourselves with is, are we teaching morals? Are we teaching values? Or are we teaching prosperity? Are we celebrating prosperity by whatever means the prosperity came? Because a lot of the people that, just like Sheikh Lemu said, a lot of the people who are perpetrators of sexual violence and rape are repeat offenders. And they are often people, like we have all learned today, in positions of power. So we are celebrating powerful politicians, powerful celebrities, powerful wealthy people in the private sector. And in this sense of celebrity, are we not saying that everything that they do is therefore okay? And when we hear that, when someone says, oh, a very powerful man like the gentleman in the US, Jeffrey Epstein, is guilty of rape. Everybody says, no, it's not possible, because such a powerful person who has such powerful friends, who sits with powerful people, cannot have done something like that, because our psyche is all focused on these human definitions of power and success that is built around materialism and, you know, what people possess. So this is very important also. So just to recap on everything that everyone has said so far, I would just like to talk around three things. Some of it has already been said, and I will just reiterate some of those things and conclude. Firstly, the mind. There's work to be done in our human psyche. Secondly, around advocacy. And then thirdly, around safeguards and structures in our society. And all of us, Christians and Muslims, whether we are lay people or we are ministers, all of us have a responsibility in these three areas: in the mind, in advocacy, and in ensuring the right safeguards in society. So let me talk quickly about the mind. We've spoken about pornography, and I want to reiterate this, that growing up as a child, and even now as a parent, I find that we tell our children, we list all the bad things that children should not do. But I'll be honest, growing up, nobody listed pornography. And I think it's a big issue. So pornography for me is that thing that really messes up the minds of young people and everybody as you grow older. You know, so very important. We tell young people, don't take drugs, don't hang out with bad guys. We say don't drink, don't do this. But the issue of pornography, there's a lot of silence around it. And I think that it's a major factor in driving some of this sexual violence. The other issue around mental health, and I won't talk too much about it, everything has been said. I think we need to start paying attention, for example, in our schools, with psychiatric evaluations for people who are in positions of power. The same thing with our churches and our mosques. People who are in positions of power in those institutions that are very exposed to young people. Can we start to talk and actually act on psychiatric evaluations for our teachers? And third thing that I think it's important regarding the mind is music. And again, closely related to secular music is the celebrities that are behind this music. And I'm sure you're all aware of people like R. Kelly, the very popular celebrity musician in the United States, and all the issues around his own sexual violence and rape cases. I think that celebrities and secular music is something that we should pay much more attention to, because a lot of it is really driving some of these inappropriate thinking, actions, and behaviors. In the area of advocacy, we've spoken about teaching about sexuality and teaching about it in a proper way, in an open, engaging way, not in a threatening way. And not just in our churches and in our mosques, but in our homes, in our schools, from parents. This concept of your daughter is pregnant, or this concept of sexuality, like is pregnant, so I am ashamed as a parent. It's not about your shame. It should be about the fact that this thing is not right, not that you are ashamed of it. So we need to take the conversation away from our shame to what is right and what is wrong. And of course, we need to have more conversations. And finally, around safeguards and structure, I think that we've talked about forensics, very important, rape kits and all of these things. And the truth is, fingerprints don't even exist in Nigeria. Crimes cannot be solved using fingerprints in Nigeria. Talk less of things like rape kits. So those of us who are in positions of influence in politics and in governance, these are the types of things that we must raise and pursue as advocates, because these are the things that really create the right basis for society to thrive and for people to have the freedoms that democracy is meant to bring. Identity management is closely related to forensics, whistleblowing, and very importantly, blacklisting. Over the years, people have been accused of, people have been found guilty of rape and sexual violence. We need to start creating a database, a blacklist for schools, for jobs, for all sorts of things, so that we know, and that type of ostracizing will also help to deter people from these types of inappropriate behaviors. So essentially, I've spoken about just 3 things. We need to work on our minds as individuals and work on the minds of our children and people around us. We have to do work in advocacy, and we've spoken a lot about all the advocacy that needs to be done. More conversations like these in our churches, in our homes, in our schools, in our offices, and also some of the structures and safeguards in society, law enforcement, blacklisting, whistleblowing, and so on and so forth. And I hope that we can continue these conversations. And I again thank you all for listening and being here. I see large numbers of people from all over Nigeria and perhaps abroad. And thank the organizers for doing such a great job putting this together this morning.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Omagbitse. So much has been said, and I have so much that I want to, say or questions for you, but I think because of time, I see one hand has been up since we started. I think we're going to take Mary Arasomi, and it's just two minutes because there are loads of questions for all the people who have spoken. Thank you so much, all the panelists, once again, for the different perspectives that you've shared with us this morning. Is Mary on? Is she on? Okay, her hand is no longer up. Can we take Buki Shonibare? Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
2 minutes, please. You have just 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, so just a quick one. Thanks for organizing this. I listened in and it's quite educating. I just want to mention that what Mr. Barrow mentioned during his presentation regarding blacklisting. We have a framework for that already, which is the Sexual Offenders Register, and it is part of the provisions that was made in the Violence Against Persons Prohibitions Act. What is important, and where I think the church and the mosque can come in, is ensuring that this list is populated. So what that requires is when there are sexual offenders within our system, we must report them to NAPTIP, especially when they have been prosecuted, so that they can be enlisted. The Sexual Offenders Register will be publicized, and for the purposes of jobs, schools that Mr. Barrow mentioned, they would know the sexual predators among us and know they should not employ or engage them to work with people who are at risk of being sexually abused. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Buki. Can we have Teresa Olanio? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, Teresa, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you for the presentations, for all those, the speakers. Please, I would like you to explain further how you will encourage the different sectors, the churches, the malls, the schools, to have safeguarding policy, safeguarding team, awareness program, and also to encourage the implementation of this policy so that everyone will hear about abuse and will know what to do. Because it is obvious that we do not know much about abuse, about the dangers. Parents don't talk about it. Schools hardly mention it. How would you encourage or organize programs for these different sectors so that we all know about it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. I want to say, among those of us who are still about to speak, if you have a question, please can you just post it on the chat box? I'm going to call Sister Lena Mwenyi to speak.
I have a little question.
Okay.
How do we ensure that those in power are brought to the book when this happens? Because many people, the employers, they kind of hypnotize their workers or the employees, And then some people, because they are, I don't want to use the name, whether senators or whatever they call themselves, they are being, kind of portraying themselves as if they are the power that holds, and then nobody is going to kind of prosecute them. How are we going to be sure that they will be prosecuted, any of them, that nobody is above the law when it comes to prosecution? Thank you.
All right, thank you.